Hey folks, Bob here, bobsplumbingvideos.com. And if you've been watching me the past couple of weeks, you know that I've been posting some of the modules from my no-brainer home plumbing inspection checklist. Now, what is that? Basically, folks, that's my method when I do an in-home plumbing inspection. I do a walkthrough, I document, I write some stuff down, I point it out to my customer, and if I find little things, I say, you know what? Let's get these things fixed now before they turn into expensive plumbing emergencies. Anyway, the one you're going to watch right now is all about the kitchen, things that could go wrong in the kitchen, things I look out for, things I go snooping around for. I think you're going to really enjoy this video. Now, for all you trolls who think I drone on too much, you may want to pass this one up because this is a long one. To everyone else, sit back, relax, watch it. I'm also going to post links to the previous modules. There's one more left after this one, the bathroom. That'll probably come up in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, watch it. Enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side of this video. Hey, welcome folks. Bob here from bobsplumbingvideos.com. On this channel, I provide free plumbing tutorials for people who don't want to call a plumber. No scientific data, no fancy chemical breakdown of the materials I use in these videos, just common sense solutions to everyday plumbing problems. After all, folks, you shouldn't have to take out a mortgage to be able to afford a plumber. If you're new to the channel, I highly recommend you subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit that bell notification so you'll be notified of when I post a new video. Now, let's get into this video. Oops, I almost forgot. Get lost. Welcome, folks, to the no-brainer home plumbing inspection checklist, a simple strategy to identify and avoid a plumbing emergency. The kitchen. There are 5 areas in the kitchen which are cause for concern. The faucets, shut-off valves and supply tubes, drain pipes, icemaker and dishwasher connections, and finally water filters and hot water makers. Faucets. Where to look? I look for leaks around the handles and leaks from the base of the spout. Now, these first 2 will cause water to migrate onto your countertop. And if you do have laminate countertops, you want to keep that in check because eventually water will work its way into the seams and your laminate countertops will eventually pull away and you'll be faced with replacing countertops if you don't stop that water. Now, leaks from the spout would generally indicate when you turn the faucet off and it keeps dripping, an internal problem. Under these circumstances, you have 2 choices. A, call in a pro to fix it, or B, if you're handy, by all means, go ahead, repair that faucet. We don't need to be wasting water. Leaks from the spray head and or spray hose. If you do have a faucet with a spray head or perhaps a pull-out spray head from the nozzle, you're going to want to pull up the spray heads, turn your faucet on and take a look and make sure you don't see water streaming down that hose because where it goes, folks, is under your cabinet and I'm usually the one to discover it. So you're going to want to keep a check on that because I often get underneath people's cabinets and I find a flood underneath because they don't even realize when they're turning their faucets on, the water is just streaming down the hose and landing in the bottom of the cabinet. And finally, leaks from the faucet base, which would indicate it wasn't sealed properly when it was put in. So water gets underneath the base, works its way through the mounting holes of the sink. And the way you test for that simply is to get on your back, shine a flashlight up to where the faucet is mounted through the sink. And if you see signs of water, you'll automatically know that it wasn't sealed properly. Why you should care? Well, knowing where to look can uncover minor leaks before they turn into plumbing emergencies. This could save you hundreds or even thousands in unnecessary plumbing repairs. Let's check it out in this technical timeout. Hey folks, welcome to the kitchen section. We're going to go over some points that I like to look at when I'm doing this inspection. I'm going to mention funny words like stems, seats, O-rings, and you may say to yourself, Bob, what the heck are you talking about? Not to worry, I included video. I like to call these videos my technical timeout, so after I give my explanation, you'll be able to see exactly what I do. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. Now, bear in mind, folks, This is strictly an informational series. It's not meant to show you how to fix things. It's meant to make you aware of what could go wrong. And perhaps when you call your plumber, you can maybe direct him on what you found, and he can help you out on correcting it. So without any further blabbering from me, let's get going. Okay, folks, here we have an example of a single lever high arched faucet, and it makes no difference whether it's single lever, two handles. I always look for signs of water coming out around the spout. I'm looking around here to see if water's dripping out when you turn the faucet on. I'm also looking around here. For example, when we turn this handle on, I often see water just pouring out of the bottom, and it works its way onto the deck here. And it'll even leak out of the nozzle here. So when that happens, water starts to migrate on top of the countertop. And in this example, we have a laminate countertop with a laminate backsplash. And if the water sits in that seam for any amount of time and you're not aware of it, it'll get down to the sub base, the wood will swell, and the laminate will actually start to pull away. So these are things I look for when I'm doing an inspection on a kitchen faucet. Doesn't make a difference how many handles it has, as long as it has a nozzle and it's got a lever, whether it be hot, cold, or a single lever. I'm looking for signs of water when I turn the faucet on. Now, if water is dripping from the nozzle, when the faucet is off, that's going to indicate an internal problem with the faucet, and that has to be looked at. And pretty much you're either going to call in a pro, or if you're handy, you're going to attack that yourself. So let's move on now, and I'll show you some examples with a two-handle faucet. All right, folks, here we are on my benchtop demonstration, and this is a two-handle faucet. And what I wanted to make you aware of was this. I look for, when I perform these inspections, whether it be two-handle or single-levered faucets, I'm looking for water coming out from below the handles when the faucet is turned on. I'm looking for water coming out of the nozzle when the faucet is turned on. And let me just pull this handle off and demonstrate for you what I see when I pull that off. And now actually you're going to be able to see there is the faucet stem sitting in place. And here I'm going to take the nozzle off. And what I'm actually exposing, and I will get another shot for you, there are two O-rings in here, so I'm looking for the O-ring sealers here that keep the water from leaking out of the nozzle. Now, water leaking from here or water leaking from here will migrate out onto the countertop. And if this faucet is not properly sealed, the water will get underneath it and work its way down into the mounting holes. Now, bear in mind, when I started, these faucets were one solid slab of brass, meaning they were solid through and through. And if water did leak out of here, the only way it would get on the bottom and underneath was from the outside. Not so in today's world. These are hollow body faucets. Most of them are hollow. And there are openings here around the nozzle and around each stem. And the water, if it's leaking out of the handles, it'll just go down underneath the body and through the mounting holes. And I'm going to demonstrate that for you now by removing. Let me remove the stem from this faucet. Actually, I'm just going to remove the nut because this is what's holding the plate in place. Now, just keep an eye on this, folks, because you'd be surprised at the fact that this is a hollow body now. Behold, this is a hollow body. If you can just check that out, that's just a covering that sits on there. And if any water leaks out from these stems, it'll go directly, and if this is not sealed properly, it'll get right underneath through the mounting holes of the sink. And that's just the way it is today, folks. Most of the faucets, they look pretty when they're all in place, but beware, they're just hollow body faucets, and that's just the way it is in today's world. So let me take you into another slide and show you a different view of how I see things. All right, folks, I want to show you a couple of examples of why water may be leaking through the nozzle. At the same time, I'll show you why water seeps up out of the handles and onto the deck. First, I'm going to show you this traditional faucet stem. And that works simply, the on and off function, in and out. And that works with a rubber washer, which sits up against a faucet seat. And the faucet seat is located inside the faucet. You really don't see this. And if the washer is in good condition and the seat is in good condition, we have a watertight seal. Often though, you'll have a seat that's all cut up and it's all corroded, or you'll have a washer that's worn out, it's dried out, it gets hard like a rock, and that will cause water to seep through your nozzle when you turn the handles off, and that's going to need attention. Another reason water may be leaking up onto your deck through the handles is these O-ring washers. These O-ring washers wear out, and they will cause water to seep up onto the deck. Now, let me show you this. I'm going to pull out this stem, and there is another washer in here. There's another O-ring washer. So O-ring washers are the way they prevent water from getting out and up through the handles. And when those O-ring washers get dried out, they will cause water to leak. So that's one example in a traditional style stem. Now, bear in mind, stems come in many shapes, sizes, forms, and many manufacturers. This is just one. This is not, you're not going to see this particular brand all over. It's just one example. And another example I want to bring up is the ceramic cartridge. Now, ceramic cartridge is just what it says. There are 2 ceramic discs in there. And as you see me turn this, that's on, that's off, water on, water off, water on, water off. Sometimes dirt will get in there, debris will get in there, little shavings will get in there, and that will cause the faucet to leak when you turn the handle off. And the other reason you're going to get the water up and through the handles are the O-rings. These O-rings get compromised, they get dried out, and that's what's going to cause the water to leak up and coming out of here. There are actually more O-rings inside the stem. If I pull this stem out here, that you're going to see that there are more O-rings in there. But I just wanted to give you those examples of why a faucet may leak from a nozzle, and again, why the water leaks up and out the handles. All right, so in this shot here, we have that same faucet, that same hollow body faucet, and what I wanted to just show you were the O-rings here. These are the O-rings that allow water to leak through the nozzle. In this case, these O-rings are on the faucet. But in a lot of cases, the O-rings are located around the nozzle. Let me just bring a nozzle in here with some O-rings on it. As you can see, these O-rings are around the nozzle. Same thing, water will leak out onto the deck of the faucet, out and onto your sink, and it'll get into the mounting holes if that faucet is not properly sealed. Now let's take a look. Now this is a ceramic cartridge, but I want to show you how water gets out and leaks onto the deck of your faucet. You're going to see there are a series of O-rings here. Again, allowing water to leak out onto the deck of your faucet. And if that faucet is not properly sealed, it will get down below. Again, folks, this is not an instructional video on how to show you how to fix it. Just want to make you aware that if you see water coming from these places, it may be time to get a plumber in. Let's move on, and I want to show you the spray hose and how water can get below your sink without you even knowing it. All right, so you open up the doors to your cabinet one day, and it's loaded with water. And if it is, here's what you need to check. Turn your faucet on, and while you're doing that, pull up the spray out of its holder. And if you see water streaming down this hose, that's going right below your cabinet, and that means you either have a bad spray head or you have a bad hose. Now, this is all a series of gaskets. In this case, there's that dreaded O-ring gasket. And again, down inside this hose here, if you see that white male end of the hose, there's another O-ring around there that would cause the water to leak out of here. So the point is, you're never going to know this because these sprayers are always sitting in their hold. I mean, unless you're using it, and most people just don't pay attention. So if you have this sitting down here and you turn your faucet on, lift it out of its place, make sure you don't see water leaking down here. If you do, this hose is going to need attention, or you're going to need a new sprayer head, either or, maybe both. But you need to be aware, folks, water does leak out of there, and most people don't realize it. All right, let's move on and check out some water leaking through the faucet base. All right, folks, and speaking of other ways water gets underneath your counter, a lot of these faucets come supplied with these nifty little plastic gaskets on the bottom. And a lot of people just go ahead and install this with this gasket, and they don't bother putting plumber's putty or some silicone seal around here. And trust me, guys, that's a mistake. Water will get under here. These need to be sealed either with plumber's putty or with, I like a latex-based silicone seal, because if water gets underneath there, trust me, again,
I'm asking you to trust me, but I'm telling you this from experience. Water will find its way down the mounting holes and right down to the bottom of your kitchen cabinet. So again, and the way you test for that is to get underneath the cabinet on your back and you look up at the mounting holes. And if you see water seeping through, signs of water, you know that you need to seal this faucet base. So there you go, folks. Just another way water gets underneath your cabinet. And this is just another thing I look at when I perform these inspections.
By identifying these small problems now, your chances of a plumbing emergency will be greatly reduced. Let's review. We checked out faulty stems, packing nuts, and O-ring washers. We looked at a worn faucet spout. We checked faulty washers, seats, stems. We even looked at a ceramic cartridge. Faulty sprayer heads, faulty spray hoses. If you do have them, it could be either or. It's a good idea to replace them. And finally, I showed you where the sealant or putty should be applied to the faucet before it's installed into the sink. Shutoff valves and supply tubes. Kitchen and bathroom sink shutoff valves are rarely ever used. When they're needed, the first person who attempts to use them, your plumber, will cause them to leak. Folks, it happens to me all the time. When I'm called in to make a repair, I go to shut the water off, and as soon as I turn the handle, it starts to leak uncontrollably because they've been in there for 30 years, 20 years, whatever the case may be. Everything's all dried out, and I eventually end up changing the valve. If you're going to attempt to do this yourself, a word of caution, take a bucket with you because more often than not, they will leak and they probably won't stop. Why you should care? Well, faucet supply tubes are under constant water pressure, and if they decide to burst when you're not home, be prepared to get out your wallet. Folks, you know when these things break? They break in the middle of the night or they break when you're not home. And if this happens, these type of plumbing emergencies can be very costly. Where to look? I look for worn packing nuts, dried out packing. I look for leaks where the supply tubes connect to the water supply valves and or the faucet. Let's take a look in this technical timeout video.
All right, and there you get a shot of an emergency water shutoff valve. And these are the valves that you often go in and you go to close them and they will start to leak uncontrollably around the packing nuts here. They will leak down. And when that happens, you can attempt to tighten this, but more often than not, the packing inside of here is so dried out that you'll tighten and tighten and tighten, and actually nothing will happen. And these are the compression nuts going up. This is the tube going up to the faucet. This is going right up to the faucet, and this is a solid copper version of a basin supply. And I will show you an example of a flexible stainless steel version. This is, to me, is a premium way of doing things, using the solid copper supply. But you're not going to see that too often today. Everything's flexible stainless steel. So let me move on and show you an example of a flexible stainless steel supply. And maybe we'll do that on top of the bench. I'll put two of them side by side. I'll give you a comparison. And again, give you my opinion. But these are the valves you have to watch out for. Often they're in here for 25, 30 years. Then I come and I turn them and they start to leak uncontrollably. And I ultimately end up changing these valves. So there you go, folks.
All right, let's check out an emergency water shutoff valve. We have these under our kitchen and bathroom sinks, and they've been in there for 20, 30 years. First person who comes in and touches them and goes to shut them, they start to leak uncontrollably from the bottom. This is normal. And in the past, we would just go and try to tighten this clockwise in an effort to get it to stop leaking. But because everything in here is so dried out, we would then go in and back off the stem. Actually, after we shut the water off, don't forget, folks, we have to shut the water off before we do something like this. And you're going to see that there is a nylon washer in here. It's a backup washer that actually is backup for this rubber washer. If I can get it out to show you, there is that rubber washer. There's that rubber washer in there. And that rubber washer gets so dried out that it can't do its job. It actually just cannot stop the water. So you would go in there and put some Teflon packing or graphite packing. But in today's world, I would tell you, just go change the valve. Don't play around with it. Have a professional come in. If you're handy, by all means, go out and buy a new emergency water shutoff valve, and you are going to be back in business. So that's this type of valve. If you don't have this type of valve, you might have the old-fashioned globe valve with the adapter in it to put the basin supply on. These are a little more fixer-friendly, meaning that you can back off this packing nut, replace that rubber washer in there with some graphite or Teflon packing, tighten up this nut again, and you're back in business. And then it's just a matter of deciding whether you're going to use the flexible basin supply. In this case, this is a flexible supply. You have the compression part of it, and then you have the part where it's crimped onto the hose. This is where I look for leaks. And then you have the other end, which actually goes up to the faucet. And this will work as well on the emergency water shutoff valve faucet as well. This goes on here like this. Again, these are things that I look at when I'm doing my inspection. I'm looking for all those connections. And if you don't have the flexible stainless steel versions, you may be fortunate enough to have the solid copper versions. And again, we'll be looking for signs of leaks where the compression fittings are. And we're also looking for signs of leaks where it connects up to the faucet. And that's it on emergency water shutoff valves that I typically find under kitchen and bathroom fixtures. All right, I'm up on the demonstration bench here, and solely to show you the difference between the solid copper connectors, which bring the water from the emergency water shutoff valves up to the faucet. And as you can see, this is a solid copper connector, and these come 12 and 20 inches in length. And this is solid chrome-plated copper tubing. And this is my preferred method as far as hooking up a faucet goes. But the most popular style you're going to find today when you walk into any home center is going to be the flexible braided stainless steel versions. And, you know, to me, you know, these are crimped on. These connections are crimped on, and underneath is braided stainless steel or rubber hoses. But you know what, folks, this is the way it is, and it's the way of the world today, and they're out there, and this is what most people use. You just have to be aware that there are just more cause for leaks because there are more areas where leaks can develop. They'll develop from where they're crimped onto the hose. They can develop here where the compression nuts are. And that's just about it. And, you know, the difference is cost-wise probably, you know, not much of a difference cost-wise. And it just makes, you know, it makes for being aware that there are two different styles. I mean, these do make it nice if you have to make some quirky bends. But if you don't have to make quirky bends, I would say if you can and you have the skill, or, although, again, this is not all about you doing the work, folks. It's about calling a professional in to do it. I would always prefer to use these solid copper versions. At least that's the way I was brought into the business. And that's just my opinion, but this is what I look for when I'm going up there and I'm looking for water. As you can see here, you know, this is a seal between the faucet and the end of the connector. Over here you have a crimp where the hose goes into a fitting, and then that's got the nut above it. To me, it's just more stuff to go wrong. But this is the way of the world, and I just want to make you aware of it, guys. Okay, folks, let me just bring up one item that I advise you to get rid of if you do have. This is a nylon braided supply tube used for hooking up faucets, used for hooking up toilets. And I can tell you from experience that these braided nylon hoses, I've actually seen these crimps. I've actually seen the hose just blow right out of the crimp. And this happens in particular on hot water, on the hot water side when they're hooked up to faucets. Now this happens to be one for toilet supply. But folks, if you have these are accidents waiting to happen. And if given a choice, I would tell you to go either with the braided stainless steel versions. This is for a basin, but they make them for a toilet.
This is what's most popular today. But you know, in my world, I'm always old school, and I like the solid copper version of a basin or a toilet connector. But the fact of the matter is, what you're probably going to find out there on the shelves are the stainless steel versions. So once again, folks, if you have this braided nylon version, please do yourself a favor, get rid of it. And so that's all I have to say about nylon connectors. Don't use them.
Modern methods for connecting faucets, dishwashers, ice makers, etc. have become more user-friendly. As a result, these methods leave more room for failure by virtue of their design. By performing this inspection, you'll identify minor leaks before they turn into plumbing emergencies. Let's review. We looked at faulty leaking shutoff valves. We checked out leaking plastic or braided stainless steel supply tubes. A word of caution here, folks, if you do have a plastic supply tube, that is a reinforced nylon supply tube, I would suggest you get rid of it. It's just an accident waiting to happen. Drain pipes. When the water drains from your sinks, it travels through a series of waste tubing, iron and or plastic pipe. Why you should care? Well, we tend to forget the waste lines below the sink because everything is neatly tucked away under our kitchen cabinets. I constantly see high-end cabinets and laminate floors destroyed by water damage caused by unchecked leaking drain pipes. Where to look? I look for leaks from the strainer, that is the strainer going through the sink, and I do that by getting on my back, shining a light up at the bottom of the strainer. I look for leaks from the garbage disposal, if you do have one on your kitchen sink. A lot of people do have garbage disposals. I look for leaks from the waste tubing. A lot of the waste tubing today is very thin gauge brass, and it has a tendency of pitting and rotting. I look for leaks from the P-traps where they are connected to the waste line coming out of the wall. There will be corrosion there because you have brass P-traps with iron pipe, and those two metals do not mix, and they will actually cause a chemical reaction, and the metal pipe will actually rust. And I also look for leaks from the dishwasher drain hoses. A lot of times the clamps aren't tightened, or those hoses are all dried out and cracked. Let's check it out in the video.
Okay, folks, here we are underneath a kitchen sink, and I'm looking up at the strainer. I'm looking for signs of water between the strainer and the sink. I'm looking for staining around the strainer that's going down onto the waste tubing. And as you can see in this example, we're looking at plastic waste tubing, which I kind of prefer because it has a tendency of lasting forever. So I'm working my way down. I'm looking at the nuts, where the nuts connect to the strainer. I'm going to be running my hand along there and looking for any signs of water. And as I work my way down, you can see here in this particular instance, we do have a dishwasher connection. So I'm going to be checking out that clamp, make sure that clamp is tight. I'm going to be checking out the integrity of the hose, make sure that dishwasher drain hose hasn't dried out, cracked, and developed any leaks. I'm going to work my way down, all the way down. And as you can see in this example, it goes straight into the trap. There's another nut. I'm going to be running my hand around that nut, making sure there are no leaks. And then finally, we get down to where the connection is on the P-trap. And I'm going to check that nut down there. Now, the best way to test for leaks in any situation, whether it be plastic or whether it be tubular brass, is to fill the sink up to the very top. And you'll create some pressure. You pull the plug, you let that water out, and you're going to see if there are any leaks that are going to develop or if there are any weak points. And that's how I test for leaks. I always fill my sink up. I just do not run the water. I fill my sink up to the tippy top. Now let's jump in and I'll show you an example of some brass tubing. All right, folks, here we are underneath the sink that features the brass waste tubing, that very thin gauge tubing. I start at the top as always. I'm looking for signs of water between the strainer and the sink. Then I'll work my way down. I'm looking for any cracked coupling nuts. I'm running my hand around. I'm looking for signs of dampness. I'm feeling for water. I'm looking at the condition of the tubing, and as you can see here, this tubing is pitting. We have some pitting going on here, and if this was an actual inspection for one of my customers, I absolutely would recommend that they put some new fittings in here because eventually that is going to leak. I'll run all the way down into the P-trap. I go all the way down, follow it all the way down into the P-trap, and folks, the best way to find out if you have a leak is to fill up the sink to the very top. Don't just run the water. Fill the sink up to the tippy top. Pull the plug. you will create some pressure. And if there is a weak point in this tubing, guaranteed, folks, you're going to find it. Now, what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you behind the P-trap there where it's screwed onto the pipe coming out of the wall, and I'll point out the problem area where the trap actually screws onto the P-trap, because over time that will develop a leak. And I'll just point that out to you. We just want to make you aware. So here again, folks, an example of the brass waste tubing, the very thin gauge waste tubing. And it's very, very popular, especially here in my part of the country. If you're in an area that has PVC or plastic fittings, I think you're going to be all set, because in my opinion, the plastic is going to last longer than the brass. But nevertheless, that's the way it is. Now let's take you behind the P-trap, and we'll take a peek at what goes on where that trap screws onto the galvanized waste pipe coming out of the wall.
Okay, so here you're looking at a 2-inch by 1.5 swing T, meaning this T here can service an auxiliary sink as well as the master sink coming out of the top here. And these brass P-traps screw onto these galvanized nipples, which come out of the wall, the rear of the cabinet generally. And the problem arises over time that because we have a galvanized pipe here and a brass P-trap, we get this process called electrolysis, which happens over time. And eventually, when I open the cabinets to kitchen or bathroom sinks with this type of connection, the bottom here gets all blistered out over time and rusted out. And to show you that, I'm going to give you a real good example of that. We're going to go into a little screencast shot I did. And I took the following picture you're going to see off of my phone. And it was actually from a job, an actual job site that I came across. And I just wanted to show you what you should be looking at if you have a brass P-trap under your kitchen or bathroom cabinet and it's screwed onto a galvanized piece of pipe. So let's jump into the screencast, and I think you'll get the idea.
Okay, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about electrolysis. Now, as you just saw on my bench, I show you an example of a relatively new P-trap with a relatively new galvanized nipple, but in real life, this is what I find. As a matter of fact, this picture was taken on my cell phone off of a job I recently did. I was called in because the lady had a leak, and sure enough, the water was leaking at that joint there. But a lot of times I'll be called in to maybe clean a stopped up sink out, and I will explain to my customers that, once I put a snake in there and that snake starts flopping around, I'm going to actually cause that to leak if it isn't already leaking. On the other hand, sometimes if it's a bad stoppage, I'll have to take that P-trap off, and pretty much when I go to take that trap off, it's pretty much going to break right off. But this is what happens in the real world, folks. I look for this when I'm doing my inspection. I find this mostly under kitchen sinks, but on occasion I'll find it under a bathroom sink, because today, there are so many different materials today. But mainly where I find it is under a kitchen sink. And again, it's that crazy word called electrolysis. And this is what happens when you have two dissimilar metals meeting. And in this case, you get the brass trap meeting with the galvanized steel pipe. And over time, this is what happens. So I would suggest, if you're going to take a look under your kitchen sink, you might want to look on the bottom of the cabinet. You'll see rust marks. Sometimes you'll see a little rust stain down there. And that should prompt you to get under there with a flashlight and take a look, because if it looks like this, that's something that's going to need attention. Again, if you're handy, you can do it yourself. On the other hand, I would advise you to call in your licensed professional to take care of it. But again, this is what I look for when I'm doing my home plumbing inspections in the kitchen. All right, folks, here is a shot of a basic residential garbage disposal. And what I did here is note the trouble spots or things I look at when I get underneath the sink. And starting with number one, we have loose hose clamps. I'll occasionally find a loose hose clamp, and that's just a matter of tightening up. Number two, where I note leaking strainer and gaskets. Now, number two up there at the top, you're going to see a cardboard gasket, but that's not so much the culprit as is that the strainer was actually failed to be sealed with plumber's putty, and I occasionally will find water seeping through the seal between where the strainer sits in the sink and the actual bottom of the sink. And also down there by the elbow, where the elbow is bolted into the side of the garbage disposal, there is a rubber gasket under there, and that will, over time, if it's been in there for a really long time, dry out and develop a leak. 3, crack coupling nuts. Not so much with the plastic ones, unless, the person tightening them gets kind of crazy and over tightens them, they'll split. But I find cracked metal nuts, and that's just a function of, they're just die cast metal, and over time they actually split. Number 4, dried out hoses. I do occasionally find a split hose, especially if it's been in there for any amount of time. Number 5, I found a cracked elbow once, and I kind of suspect that somebody knocked into it, and that's the reason it's split, because they're pretty durable, but this one had a gaping crack in it. And finally, number 6, a cracked disposal body. Now, this particular disposal is made of ABS plastic. It's a lower end disposal, but I did find one in my career that was cracked. Again, whether somebody knocked into it or whether it was just a defect, I really don't know. But this is basically what I'm looking at when I get underneath the sink. I'll go in there with my flashlight or my drop light, and I'll, run the water. I'll fill the disposal up. I'll let it go. Just the way I do when I'm trying to test, waste fittings for leaks. You want to fill up the sink. Always fill up the sink, then let it go, because you'll create a little pressure. And if there are any weak points there, you will find them. And that's about it with garbage disposals. By taking an occasional look under your sink, you could spot a leak early enough and get it fixed fast before causing damage to your expensive cabinets. Let's review. We checked out corroded or improperly sealed basket strainers. We looked at corroded or improperly sealed disposal connections and faulty disposal housings. Folks, once in my career, I did find a cracked garbage disposal, which was made out of plastic. If that's the case, you're going to have to put a new garbage disposal in. Cracked coupling nuts, dried out or missing gaskets, pitted or corroded brass waste tubing. We looked for leaks where the brass P-trap screws onto the galvanized pipe coming out of the wall or going into the wall. And we also checked out dried out rubber waste hoses, faulty or loose hose clamps, and corroded waste tubing. Dishwasher and icemaker water connections. 2 more connections that often go unchecked and are cause for some major water damage. While you should care, the offenders here are the water supply connectors to the dishwashers and or ice maker. Unlike rigid copper tubing, they're literally rubber hoses encased in an outer covering, which can often burst when least expected. Where to look? I look for leaking speedy valves and leaking saddle valves. Braided nylon or braided stainless steel water supply tubes. Now, folks, if you have a braided nylon supply tube, get rid of it. It is an accident waiting to happen. I don't like them. I've seen too many of them burst. I look for leaking PEX tubing. Now, a note on saddle valves here. Saddle valves are inexpensive valves which are installed by drilling a hole through the copper or brass pipe. They are then held in place by a gasket and a clamp and bolted to the tubing. I would avoid them if at all possible. Folks, what I would do is ask your plumber to put a proper emergency water shutoff valve in place. These saddle valves were actually found on humidifiers to warm air systems. They would just clamp them onto the nearest water pipe they could. And I guess down the basement, if it leaks, and went on the floor, people would see it. But when you start putting these things underneath your kitchen cabinets, not a good thing, folks. I don't like them, and I don't use them. Let's check it out in this technical timeout.
All right, what we're looking at here are 2 examples of dishwasher and ice maker water supply connections. The dishwasher being on the left, the ice maker being on the right. And as you can see, that ice maker is utilizing the rigid copper water supply, which I prefer. Many people will go ahead and use the flexible stainless steel versions. And I've actually seen them use the flexible nylon supplies, which I would tell you not to use. And if you look on the bottom of that copper, you're going to see PEX tubing. Now, the reason we use PEX tubing to connect the dishwasher is because the dishwasher company actually supplied the PEX. The connection was already made underneath the dishwasher. And so we just utilized the PEX tubing and connected it to the emergency water supply valve. And what we look for, again, just like we do for any emergency water supply valve, we're looking under the connections. We're checking the packing nuts. Same thing with the ice maker. We're looking behind the valve there. We will turn the handle slightly to make sure there are no leaks. And if there are, we'll point that out to the customer and tell them you might want to change your emergency water shutoff valves for these two appliances. And pretty much that's it, folks. You just have to keep an eye. These are under constant water pressure, so unlike drain pipes, which will only leak when you use it, these will leak continuously. And if you don't keep an eye under your cabinet every once in a while, you could open the cabinet one day and find a boatload of water under there. So these two connections are something that I check when I do my inspection, along with everything else, the emergency water shutoff valves, the drain lines, anything that has to do with anything underneath your kitchen sink. Okay, folks, here's my take on saddle valves. Very simple. You clamp them on, easy to put on. You would drill a hole in the pipe, clamp it on. You have this little gasket, which would be your only protection between you and the water. Typically found on warm air systems, they would install these on water lines to supply the humidifiers. Now, even in today's world, you don't even have to drill a hole anymore. You just would back off this valve all the way, counterclockwise, clamp it onto the pipe, and then just turn it clockwise until this little piercing tip would pierce the copper tubing. You back it off, and it was installed. So guys would start putting them under kitchen sinks to supply water to ice makers. Folks, I don't like them. I just think they're cheap, they're chintzy, and they leave more room for failure. If you're going to have an ice maker installed for your refrigerator, for my money, I would go with a connection cut into your water line. Let's say this was your cold water line. I would have my plumber put a T connection in and put a regular proper emergency water shutoff valve. This is a better job, and in the long run, it's going to leave less room for failure. So there you go, folks. My take on saddle valves. I don't like them. They're cheap, they're inexpensive, but they also leave room for nightmares down the road. My opinion, guys, do not use a saddle valve.
Unlike rigid water connections, the modern day methods leave more chance for failure. They often will fail at the crimp connections where they connect to the shutoff valves, faucets, dishwashers, and ice makers. Burst water connectors can cause massive water damage. Folks, when I started, everything was hooked up with solid copper connectors. Today, these stainless steel connectors, the plastic connectors, they have crimped ends on them, and there are just more places for failure. And because of that, I don't like them. And in most cases, I will still use rigid copper connectors. Although people call me old-fashioned, that's just the way I feel safe. Let's review. We looked at faulty leaking speedy valves, faulty leaking saddle valves, which, by the way, I would not use. I would avoid if at all possible. We checked out braided nylon water supply tubes, which are accidents waiting to happen. Replace them with the braided stainless steel versions, or better yet, the rigid copper versions. Always check the crimp connections where the braided supply tubes connect to the shutoff valves and where they connect to the faucets. 1/4-inch PEX tubing is often used for connecting ice makers. My choice would be to go with either the braided stainless steel version or rigid 1/4-inch copper tubing for a bulletproof, leak-free job. Water filters. There are many manufacturers who make under-counter water filtration systems. Each have their own unique design and configurations. Why you should care? Once again, because they're out of sight and out of mind, damage often goes undetected. But unlike drain pipes, water filters are under constant water pressure, which can cause serious damage quickly. Where to look? The push-fit water connections, the O-ring gaskets where the canister screws into the filter head, the connections to and from the filter up to the auxiliary spigot. Let's check it out in this video. Okay, folks, here we are with the most basic of water filter installations. Again, like I mentioned, there are several different water filter configurations made by several companies. This is a very basic installation. Now, as you can see here, we have the cold water supply on the right, and it's entering the filter on the left. Goes in, the water gets filtered, goes out up to the auxiliary spigot as filtered water. At the top of this filter head, you're going to see compression fittings, but in today's world, most of them are the push fit type, as illustrated in the upper left-hand corner there. And that's simply made by pushing the PEX tubing in, and it'll click into place. It'll actually snap into place. You won't be able to pull it out. But it is removable. If you push in on that gray collar, you'll be able to remove that tubing. But what I find is a lot of people don't push it in far enough. They don't wait for it to click, and they think it's, watertight. And a lot of times that'll actually pull out and pop out. If you don't hear that click, folks, you got to keep an eye on that, because it'll actually work its way out and you'll have water leaking all over the place. The other area of concern here is the O-ring washer. There is an O-ring up in that head. And when you go to change the filter, unscrew the canister, a lot of times people don't realize there is an O-ring up there. And as they change the filter and go to reinstall the filter housing, that O-ring will work its way out, and while you're screwing the canister back in, or the filter housing, you'll be pinching the O-ring and it'll actually leak. The canister will leak all over the place. And I might add in this illustration that this canister is sitting on the floor, but in actuality, they're up off the floor. They're screwed to the cabinet, and there's enough room on the bottom that you can actually unscrew it and drop it so you can pull it away. But a lot of times when you do drop it and pull it away, you don't see the O-ring. Sometimes the O-rings will fall out, but a lot of times they'll just stay up there and they'll start to like wiggle their way halfway out. So you want to check that O-ring. If you got to get under there with a mirror, look up, make sure it's in there. If you're going to replace the O-ring, get a little silicone sealant, stick it up there so the silicone will help the O-ring stay up in place while you screw the canister back. And that's about it, folks. This is a very basic filter installation. Again, water filters are under constant water pressure, so you need to be made aware of that. You don't want to see any water anywhere. And that's about it with a typical filter installation. The biggest offender is the O-ring washer between the cartridge canister and the filter head. I often find this O-ring washer that's placed up there, it starts to work its way out as you're attempting to screw the canister in. And as a result, people end up pinching it and it'll end up leaking. You'll never know it because initially you'll think it's watertight, and then you close the cabinet and then you go under there a couple of hours later and there's water all over the place. Often undetected, cabinets can be ruined and water will find its way out of the cabinets and onto your kitchen floor. Let's review. Check that the push fittings are secure and fully engaged. Folks, make sure that when you push the tubing into the fitting, you hear it click. If you don't hear that click, it's not connected properly. If the O-ring gaskets are leaking, replace them with original manufacturer replacements. No aftermarket parts here, folks. If you have a water filter from manufacturer A, do not expect manufacturer B's O-ring to work. Go out and find like parts from the same manufacturer. Check all the connections between the filter housing and the auxiliary spigot. Instant hot water makers. Although I'm not a fan of these modern conveniences, there are a couple of things you should keep an eye on. Folks, I don't like them because I find that after a couple of years, the water takes on an odor. We have good water here in New York City, and I can only imagine in other parts of the country where the water isn't as good. It could possibly be worse. Nevertheless, people have these appliances, and I just want to make you aware. For my money, if I want to heat a cup of water, put it in the microwave, zap it on high for 1 minute, and I'm good to go. But they're out there, and you need to know this stuff. Why you should care. These modern conveniences are often hung on the cabinet wall and forgotten about. Just another source of unnecessary water damage, which could potentially cause thousands of dollars in damage. Where to look? I look at loose or leaking water connections and a leaking tank. And if you do have a leaking tank, you're going to be faced with replacing it. No fix for this one, folks. Let's check it out in this technical timeout. All right, and finally, the hot water dispenser. Again, I'm not a fan of these modern appliances, but they are out there. And if you do have one, these are the things I look at. Now, at the top, you'll see the auxiliary dispenser faucet, which is pretty self-explanatory. Down at the bottom, you're going to see the cold water supply, which is coming in and feeding the kitchen faucet, as well as the hot water dispenser. Now, let me make an observation here. What they did is they used one of those nasty saddle valves and they actually tapped it off of the supply to the kitchen faucet, which is not the way I would do it, but that's the way it's done here. That's the way I see it done. And I'm looking for leaks where the saddle valve is clamped onto the tube. I'm looking for leaks from the compression nuts. Now, if you look at the hot water supply coming down from the auxiliary dispenser faucet at the bottom there, you're going to see a nut. You'll also see a nut in the middle coming down on the vent tube. These are compression nuts, and this is where I look for signs of water leaking. I will also look for signs of water leaking from the actual tank itself. I've actually seen the tanks been in there for so long that they actually develop leaks. And if that's the case, you're going to be faced with putting a new tank in. So I'm always looking for any visible signs of water anywhere at any joints. And just keep in mind that this appliance is under continued water pressure, meaning it's under pressure 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you know what? It pays every once in a while to get under there with a flashlight, take a look, just make sure everything is dry. That's plain and simply it. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to make sure everything is dry. But if I see signs of water, that's something that's going to need attention. And again, if you're handy, by all means, go in there and have at it. On the other hand, if you're not and you do see water, I do advocate going out and calling a pro to take care of it. And that's about it with the hot water dispenser. Let's review. We checked all the connections between the water supply valve and the tank. We checked all connections from the tank up to the auxiliary spigot. If the tank is leaking, it's going to be time for a new hot water maker. Because these tanks are tucked away under into the rear of the sink base cabinet, they tend to be forgotten. An occasional look could save you unnecessary water damage. So there you go, guys. Some useful information on what could go on in your kitchen. Now, if you missed any of the other modules, I will leave links in the description box down below and also in the cards up above. Also, don't forget to check out one of these two videos that are going to pop up here to your right. One of them I chose, one of them YouTube chose. As always, folks, I want to thank you for stopping by. I appreciate your viewership. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and don't forget to hit that bell so you'll be notified of when I put up a new video. Stay well, and as always, happy plumbing.